150,000. That's how many drug tests Victoria Police will be conducting over the next year. That means drug testing more drivers in more places more often. It's across all Victoria. TAC, towards zero.
My nerves are bad tonight. Yes, bad. Stay with me. Speak to me. Why do you never speak? Speak. What are you thinking of? What thinking? What?
Every job she touches seems to go well.
That's Des Appleby talking about his federal police colleague, Celeste Johnston.
And we love Celeste because she's lucky. And I'm a big believer in luck. I live next door to McHugh, so you've got to be a big believer in luck here.
Remember, it was Celeste who received the initial tip that a heroin import might be coming and that a guy called Teng might be involved.
And conversely, we have another person, I won't name, she's unlucky. That sort of bad luck, if it could possibly go wrong, it'll go wrong to her. And if it could possibly go right, it goes right to Celeste.
Last episode, luck was in short supply. From inside the rented Tarago, we heard Teng hoping out loud that police weren't listening in on his conversations with his accomplice, Lee.
These guys from a rental company, can they plan that kind of thing to listen in on us? Is this possible? What do you reckon?
And from Des we heard how much he was hoping to take some of his team out for a much-needed meal.
So we actually booked into a French restaurant in Geelong.
At first things looked good. Police believed the two men they'd been watching so closely, Lee and Teng, were lying low for the night on April 15, 2003.
And we're all getting dressed, so we were going to go out to a restaurant and have a nice meal.
But that all changed when Teng and Lee suddenly left their rooms and sped off in their Tarago. They made a series of turns and lost the only surveillance team on them.
We all scrambled then, and I think I ate pizza that night, so no French meal for me. The surveillance were obviously flooded the Geelong area looking for it to pick them up.
None of the surveillance teams in Geelong were able to get a lock on Teng and Lee. The police were flying blind. Des had only one surveillance car left, and it was in Lorne on the Great Ocean Road. You can get into Lorne from Geelong two ways, along the coast or through the hills. But both routes have to use the same roundabout just before a narrow bridge over the Lorne River.
The guys in Lorne sat up off the road, waiting for what's going to happen next. Interestingly, they watched a car go through the roundabout just outside of Lorne, just on the outskirts of town, and they think, the next car will just practice dropping in behind the car and see what the timings are, basically waiting for the crooks to come through town and then drop in behind it. Well, the next car that came through, they dropped in behind, and it was Teng's car. In terms of the luck of that is just incredible, but I do believe in luck.
We're going to step back in time now, to 7 hours before Des had his dinner plans interrupted. Lee and Teng had slept in late and only emerged from their Geelong motel room just before noon on April 15. They hopped in the Tarago van and headed towards Lorne, still unaware everything they said was being recorded. But as useful as the listening device was for Des and his team, they couldn't act immediately on what was being said. Translating the conversations into English took a few hours. So this meant Des was having to play catch-up and make big decisions on the fly. Lee and Teng spent the early part of the afternoon in and around Lorne, but then they hit the highway back to Melbourne. On the way back, Lee was having a serious phone conversation with the third Shore Party member, Lam. After ending the call, Lee told Teng that it appeared the arrival of the girlfriend, their code name for the heroine, had been delayed.
The girlfriend? If it's 3 hours late, don't go and get it. You can reschedule with him tomorrow. If it's 2 or 3 hours, it's not good for you to get it. That's how you know something is wrong. I'm telling you this, but you can't go around telling people I said it. It's just from me to you.
This, Lee said, was a sign that something was wrong. And he warned Teng just what was at stake.
When something is late, don't go and pick it up. Don't be responsible to any side. If you keep your life, you can do anything. If you're inside, you're dead.
Lam had been at the casino in Melbourne all day. He was joined there by Lee and Teng around 5 p.m. Phone records showed the trio got busy on their prepaid burner phones. They made several international calls. The upshot of the calls was that the heroin drop was still going ahead, despite Lee's concerns about the late arrival. 2 hours later, just after 7 p.m, Lee and Teng rushed from their rooms and jumped in the Tarago. At the same time down in Geelong, Des and his hungry team were just about to head out for their meal when word came through that the Tarago was on the move again.
So everyone's now moving to where they are. There was radio traffic from our headquarters talking about that was going to happen that night. And there'd been some discussion earlier about a speedboat and a speedboat coming to shore.
Will we be able to see it, the speedboat?
They'll use the speedboat to ferry it over to you. That's more or less how it should work. I suspect that's how they do things.
Des was only now receiving translated conversations from earlier in the afternoon, which captured Lee and Teng talking about a speedboat. He was getting a picture of what might be about to unfold. As they headed back down the highway to Lorne, Lee and Teng didn't know it, but their luck was about to run out. It was now after 8 p.m. and it was dark. Des and a large contingent of federal police were racing towards the coast.
And it was a moonlit night, being Easter at the time, and you could see far out to sea and you could see the conditions under the moonlight, and it was huge waves.
And then the handful of federal police already in Lorne saw something else, something that took them by surprise. A hulking illuminated ship lurching in heavy seas, dangerously close to the Boggley Creek shoreline.
So that night is when the avian team discovered the boat.
One of the federal agents reported the ship to Des and the operational control room in Melbourne. Then he took out his thermal imaging video camera and started filming. The footage of the Pong Su from that night is dramatic and frightening. Through the camera lens, the Pong Su looks like a ghost ship. The lights on her mast and bridge shine bright against the dull grey of her hull. The heavy swell is pushing her around, and she looks very close to land. All the key actors were converging. By 10 p.m, Lee and Teng were in Lorne. So were Des and his team. And Lam was finally on the move, driving towards Lorne in a blue Ford Focus hatchback. It was game time. Or was it?
Now give upstairs a call. Say I still can't contact him. Explain it to them. Because right now they're the only ones who can get a hold of him. Say your boyfriend's phone isn't turning on right now. How am I supposed to take a girlfriend? I get it.
Although Lam was on the move, Lee and Teng didn't know it. He wasn't answering his phone. And Lee was getting more angry by the minute.
If he was brave, he'd have come see me before. I'm telling you, the more I think about it, the angrier I'm getting. Why should I go to the beach with him? He's scared of dying. Such a coward. The way he's acting, it's harming you. That's right. The trip to the beach is the most dangerous one. Why should I go to the beach? Fuck.
In his fury, Lee revealed Lam's vital importance to the mission.
Did he tell you what he'd do?
No lah, his phone is turned off. I can't even get through to him.
Tell that to upstairs. If he's not there, we can't get the girlfriend, right? That guy won't give it to us. So we need to find him first.
Lee's comment here is really important. Lam was the only one Wong and the other man on the Pong Su would pass the heroin to. Not Lee or Teng, just Lam. We'll learn why later in the series. All Lee and Teng could do was to contact the crime bosses back in Asia to get them to put the hard word on Lam. Lee was ropeable.
How can he still be allowed to be the boyfriend, to let him take the lead role? I don't understand it. Is he even thinking about the money? It's unreasonable. At least pick up the phone and tell us what's going on. My cock is bigger than his head.
Teng told Lee that he thought Lam was scared. At least Lam had a fake licence to go with his false passport to cover his tracks. Teng had neither. A point Lee didn't miss.
You can't get away. You used your name to rent the car for him. You have to find him today no matter what. Fuck. Turning off the phone. If he can't find his way, he should turn on his phone.
Teng dropped off a still fuming Lee at Lorne's historic Grand Pacific Hotel, close to 10 p.m. And then he drove off alone in the Tarago. Remember, Lee was adamant he wouldn't be anywhere near the beach. It was too dangerous. 10 minutes later, police saw Lam driving a blue Ford Focus past Boggley Creek. Lee and Teng's phone calls to the bosses overseas must have worked. Teng honked his horn to gain Lam's attention after he missed the Boggley Creek car park turnoff. The pair got out and talked for a few moments before Teng returned to the Pacific Hotel, where Lee was waiting. Now it was just Lam alone, looking at the brightly lit Pong Su. It was around 11 p.m. A few hundred metres offshore, the men on the Pong Su were waiting for a flash of a car light from Boggley Creek to signal it was time to start the operation. Here's Des again.
And they're doing a night beach drop in very unfavourable conditions to someone signalling on shore with lights going and whatnot. It's a full-on smuggling operation by people that know what they're doing. It's not their first rodeo.
Lam flicked his headlights to the ship. It was go time. Wong and the man who had boarded the Pong Su at Sister Island weeks before clambered into the small motorised rubber dinghy that had been brought along for just this night, just this job. Tucked in with them were 6 packages of heroin wrapped in bubble wrap and sealed in plastic. Around them, the waves were surging in swells of 8 to 10 foot. Wong and the other man made sure to leave any identity documents on the Pong Su. Their plan was to spend only a few minutes on the Australian mainland before returning to the ship.
It's virtually all hands on deck. They're going to use the derrick to launch the dinghy.
A derrick is a kind of mechanical crane used on big ships to lower cargo. In this case, a small rubber dinghy, 2 men and 150 kilograms of heroin.
It's a huge boat. It's 106 metres long. At the sides of it, when you sit up alongside it, it's many metres up to the deck. With the sea conditions, the rocking, a derrick would be used to launch the boat off the side and lower it into the ocean. And that would be quite an exercise. So that virtually everyone on the boat would be involved in that exercise of launching that dinghy and the men.
More than $100 million was riding on Wong and the other guy getting the heroin safely to shore. Important and dangerous men in North Korea, Macau, Thailand and elsewhere were relying on them. What no one could have predicted was that their brand new outboard motor would cut out, leaving them at the mercy of the Antarctic-powered swell of the Southern Ocean. We only know bits of what happened next, thanks to the listening device in the Tarago. It captured an exhausted Lam on the phone to someone, reporting the scene from the beach.
Yeah, but listen to me. What is the situation? No, he dare not carry the stuff, and I exhausted. Fuck! They won't carry them together. You know, one is dead. Do you know? Hello? One is dead, do you know? Okay. Speak slowly. The stuff's in the bag, too heavy, yeah? No one dares to take them, too heavy to pull uphill, you know? No, it's up road. Dare not carry them now. We just carry as much as we can.
The disaster at Boggley Creek caused Lee to do the very thing he vowed he wouldn't: turn up at the beach and help. The listening device picked up Lee and Lam talking about what to do next.
How much is left? Put it in the car in front. Don't put it here, carry it. Put it in the front. Has everything been loaded?
Not just yet.
There's 3 left. How many have been loaded?
2.
Okay, your car should go first. Quick, your car. This car can go now, okay? Wait for me there. Wait for me outside the hotel.
Hey, I can't carry it all.
There's so much stuff.
The police missed seeing any of this because of a big call that Des had made earlier in the night.
Got to a point where the surveillance were ringing me saying, we're going to get burnt. And to talk about being burnt means when the crooks actually establish that they're being surveilled by the police. And if they do that, if that happens to you before handover occurs, then they'll abort the mission and all their efforts come to naught. And the advice from the surveillance team leader at the time, he said, we need to pull off or we'll get burnt. If we knew exactly what was going to happen, we would have had, oodles of different resources in place. We would have had the Navy offshore. We would have had lots and lots of people around Boggley Creek hidden and watching the drop and doing all those things. That if we knew what was going to happen, that's what we would have done.
Des was right. Lee and Teng were hyper alert to any police presence.
The boat is over there.
Car? What's that car?
What? The police car?
Yeah?
Is that a police car?
Hey, small one or big one?
I can't see it clearly.
I don't know what car it is.
I haven't seen it. How can I tell?
The people who got closest to seeing the heroin handover weren't the police, but a carload of young Wye River blokes who'd been having a few beers. One of them was Damon Barbante.
So after work, we'd all sort of, we were going to go to Lawn to have a few drinks. I had this old HR station wagon that was lucky to be roadworthy, and we were pretty broke, so we were sort of trying to work a way to get into Lawn with this car. So we went to the local mower shed that that was there and stole some mower petrol so we could get into Lawn and back. And we cruised in. On the way in, we drove down past Boggley where it was anchored off, and it was just the biggest swell of it was huge. The swell was just rolling in, and we're just like, oh yeah, look at that, and oh crumbs, look at the boat.
Damon and his mates also noticed a Toyota Tarago in the Boggley Creek car park when they drove past on their way to Lawn between 10 and 11 p.m. They kept on going to the Lawn pub. Although Des had made the strategic call to back off from Boggley Creek, he covered as many exit and entry points along the Great Ocean Road as he could. A word from our sponsor.
150,000. That's how many drug tests Victoria Police will be conducting over the next year. That means drug testing more drivers in more places more often. It's across all Victoria. TAC towards zero.
Back on the beach, Zhuang had somehow survived the dinghy capsizing. Together, he and Lam managed to haul Wong's drowned partner from the water and 5 of the 6 25-kilogram packages of heroin. The 6 had disappeared in the dark. Working furiously, Lam got the packages up the rock-strewn beach to the Boggley Creek car park, where Teng and Lee were waiting. It would have been hard work. Because of the chaos and his fear police were nearby, Lee changed plans and didn't take all the heroin as he was meant to. Lam was left with 3 packages in his Ford Focus. Wong's survival and Lam's clear thinking during a crisis made a lasting impression on Des.
But Lam himself, and even to this day I don't know his real name, he was obviously an operative of some description and a very capable cat. He was someone that was sent with the task of being the interface between the boat and the shore party, so he had a very critical role, and you can see from his activities that he was a very capable man.
It was now after 1 a.m, and Lee and Teng left the beach with 2 packages of heroin in their Tarago van and returned to their rooms at the Grand Pacific Hotel in Lorne. Lam had been left with 75 kilograms of heroin. This wasn't part of the deal. Lam was only meant to take the drugs from Wong out of the dinghy and give them to Lee and Teng in the car park. He even had a ticket to fly out of Melbourne for China in just a few hours at 8:30 a.m. So all he could do was hide the drugs and get out of there as fast as he could.
He then drove to the very first turnout. The very first place he could pull over with a car, pulled over, and there's lots of places to walk into the bush. Instead, he crosses the road, then goes up a small embankment of probably just short of 2 metres, and then goes into the bush. And for him, a great fortune, there was a scrape where obviously some old earthworks had been, and he was able to then place the heroin into the scrape, which was almost exactly been made for it. It was that same dimension, and then cover it with earth and leaves and stuff. And it was a very, very good concealment.
On an unlucky night, Lam got a lucky break. He took the one exit point police had yet to cover and took off through the hills behind Lorne. Back on board the Pong Su, it must have become clear that something had gone seriously wrong when the rubber dinghy carrying Wong and his partner didn't return. People on board were trying to figure out another way.
It was clear that he was up there communicating back to the vessel.
After 1 a.m, Damon and his mates had had their fun in Lorne and were driving back to Wye River. They again passed Boggley Creek and couldn't miss the big ship.
You could see it. It was lit up like a Christmas tree, and it was way closer. And we thought, oh wow, look at that! And then we got around to the Boggley car park, and Tato and Steve and Maddie was just going, yeah, party on the boat, we got to stop. And in the car park, the boat, when we pulled up, the boat was way closer. It was only like 200 metres off the edge of the reef. And it was, you could see the sea just pounding it. It was rocking and rolling. And then everyone's like, the car park had just been relayed, so there was all these decent-sized rocks. So everyone's in the car park just going, yes, let's see if we can hit it. So they're all throwing rocks at the bloody thing.
At 1:22 a.m, Lee and Teng parked their Tarago van in an underground car park at the Grand Pacific Hotel and headed up to their rooms.
We had set up there, and the surveillance did watch them arrive, but they didn't actually observe them taking any packages up to the room. So we assumed that they might bring the drugs back to a room or have another room at the hotel complex where they would store the drugs. Once they come back to the apartments, they parked and went to bed, and then we're just wondering what to do next.
Once he was confident Lee and Teng wouldn't re-emerge, Des sent a couple of his officers into the car park to have a look at the Tarago. It was now 3 a.m.
Looking in the car, you could see that there's 2 blue tarpaulin sort of packages wrapped in a fishing net. So the netting that you'd see. So it looks like something had been from a beach drop. They were looking at the packages and obviously talking to me as they're looking at the packages, and I'm up near the school. And they're describing the dimensions, and we realise that would likely be drugs, highly likely to be drugs. But the argument then just started was how much.
The visual confirmation of what looked to be a serious amount of drugs had Des's adrenaline pumping.
And to see that amount there, and you know you're going to get them, and to see it there right in front of you is a very good feeling. We hunt people like this. We actually enjoy the hunt, and then we're getting close to the kill.
Back at Boggley Creek, it was just Wong and his dead partner. Wong had concealed his friend's body under heavy kelp and overhanging rocks. The rubber dinghy was busted up, and although the Pong Su was waiting not too far out to sea, swimming out in such ferocious conditions would be certain death. So Wong crossed the Great Ocean Road and walked up the steep hills. He took cover in thick scrub to stay warm and hidden. Over the next 36 hours, he set up 2 hiding spots about 100 metres apart. From these, he could see any action at the beach without being discovered. Wong must have been wondering how the hell he was going to get out of this mess. He had a snap-lock plastic bag with $1,000, an orange Nokia mobile phone, cigarettes and some alcohol. He also had a GPS device and the binoculars Lam had recently bought in Geelong. The physical and mental ordeal Wong had just been through meant his condition was poor and getting worse by the hour. Des was also feeling the strain.
I was exhausted. I didn't think we had much sleep in the many days before this point.
Now approaching 4 a.m, Des was beyond tired. But before he could rest, he had to devise a plan to literally catch Lee and Teng red-handed with the heroin. Des decided to put his tactical operations team in a van and park it close to Lee and Teng's Tarago.
And what they devised actually was to let the tyre down in the Tarago on the driver's side so that when they came to get into the car the next morning, they would view the flat tyre, then have to change the tyre, then they'd go to the back of the car, and obviously they have to lift up all the heroin to get the tyre out, and then our people would jump out and arrest them. So that was the plan, and it sounds like a good plan, doesn't it?
Now Des could get some rest. Lee and Teng had had a long day and late night, so no one was expecting them to rise early. Des headed to a packed motel room the police had managed to rustle up at short notice.
There was 5 of us in the room and 3 of us in the bed. So I'm in a bed with 2 other fellows, and there's 2 other guys sleeping on the couch.
Unfortunately for Des and his roommates, Federal Police Command were swinging into action.
And the traffic communications back to me as the field commander was such that the radio wouldn't stop squawking and my phone wouldn't stop going off. And the other guys, they had a bit of a vote, and I was actually kicked off the island, and I was ejected from the room so they could get some sleep.
Des went back to his car and waited it out with the surveillance guys at the Grand Pacific Hotel, where Lee and Teng were staying. At least he got to see a Great Ocean Road sunrise. At just before 7 a.m, he thought it would be a nice gesture to get the surveillance crew some coffee and food from Lorne's Bakery.
And as it happened, one of the 2 comes out to the Tarago, and he has a look at the front tyre and decides that he's going to drive it anyway.
Once again, Lee and Teng had ruined Des's plan to get some decent food into his crew.
So by this stage, I'd done a U-turn in the main street of Lorne and then was heading back up, thinking that they'd all be trussed up like chickens. And the first car I see coming down the road is the Tarago. So we pass, and there's a procession behind it of people, cars. And as it gets to the edge of Lorne, near the pub there, they try to pull it over and it doesn't stop.
So the police did it for them. They jammed the Tarago with a car at the front and one at the back.
Certainly they weren't compliant, particularly Teng was not compliant, so he had to be forcibly restrained. Most people would comply with a large group of black-clad police, but no.
Once again, police filmed what was going on. The footage shows a banged-up Tarago, 2 Asian blokes handcuffed face down on the road, and officers struggling to undo the well-wrapped packages found inside the van.
There you go. Merry Christmas. Pull one of the blocks out first.
Okay. WO Globe Plan.
Police now had Lee and Teng and 50 kilograms of heroin. It was a good haul, but they knew from monitoring the listening device there should be much more. Lam was still on the run, but not for long. Police pulled him over in Geelong on his way to Melbourne. During what was a busy morning, police confirmed where the ship was actually from, and this made their job a whole lot more complicated.
Then it went berserk. So as soon as it was North Koreans, everyone wanted to be involved. So it became then a whole of government exercise.
it's reasonable to ask why Master Sun didn't steam out of Australian waters as soon as it became clear that the drug drop hadn't gone to plan. Master Sun had hours to get a head start to escape the reach of Australian authorities, but he chose not to. Instead, he hung around all morning. He had the Pong Su run a zigzag course in still rough waters just off Boggley Creek. He was, at great risk to himself and his crew, giving Wong every chance to somehow get back on board.
To their credit, they were trying to recover their man. They hadn't immediately abandoned him. They were trying to work it out, how to do that.
With Lee and Teng in custody, police now rocked up to Boggley Creek. They couldn't miss the washed-up rubber dinghy and 2 life jackets strewn on the shore. From his observation post above, Wong would have seen police flood the beach. They filmed their search, rolling away rocks and lifting seaweed in the hope of finding more heroin. But they found something else instead.
Dead person. Holy shit. Des?
The discovery of Wong's dead partner complicated things even further. Victoria Police's homicide squad was called out, and for the time being at least, Des and the Federal Police had to cede control of the scene at the beach.
On the night, I think about the 15th, received a phone call from the homicide squad to say that a body had been found on the Great Ocean Road in mysterious circumstances, and they requested our assistance early the following morning.
Tim James was a sergeant leading a 4-person crew in Victoria Police's Search and Rescue Division.
The fact that this guy was buried and he hadn't undergone an autopsy at that stage, but certainly you have to cover all options. Well, how did he end up there, and are the weapons involved? Is there a crime? Is one of the first questions you're taught when you go through the academy. Has an offence been committed?
No longer with Victoria Police, Tim still retains the wiry strength and smarts required for search and rescue work. His recollection is that initially he and his team were being kept in the dark about what was really going down. This sort of stuff can happen sometimes when state and federal police collide on a job. But pretty soon, Tim had a basic overview of the situation.
Exactly, when we weren't actually sat down and given a full briefing, other than to say that there was potentially a ship involved, there was people had come ashore, drugs had been located, people had been arrested, and we were looking for potentially more drugs, and we're missing potentially a person, so could you help us out with this?
For what it's worth, Des told me he was grateful for the Victorian help. It gave him time to catch his breath, and he said he learnt some things from observing the methodical teamwork of the homicide detectives and Tim's unit. On their first day at Boggley Creek, which was April 16, and the morning after the heroin import, Tim and his crew found bits and pieces along the beach.
Police are trained right from the beginning to try and create a nexus, a connection between the crime and the person involved. So it's really basic crime detection work. It's just finding evidence. And that's what we did. We set about it, and the little things that pop up from memory were things like car tyre inner tube, rubber inner tube tyres. They were cut in strips of about 1 inch wide, and we were finding lots of them, and just seemed to be unusual. But it was worth noting. What were these here for, and what did they do?
It wasn't until the next day, April 17, that Tim and his team made their most important discovery. It started out with Tim asking his senior constable to cross the road and head up to a cliff overlooking the beach.
She reported back that afternoon that she'd come across what looked to be some form of a base. There was padded ground down grass, there was a bottle of half-consumed water, there was some gloves, and it just looked like someone had been sitting up there. And while she was there, she said, I could hear something moving in the bush, but I thought it might have been a wombat, it could have been a wallaby, it could have been a number of things. But she said, I had a look around, I couldn't see anything.
By now, the sea was starting to subside, and Tim sent in 2 of his team with snorkels to have a look around. He also asked his last team member and the Federal Police liaison officer to take a 4-wheel drive to have a look around the off-road tracks nearby. After they'd gone, Tim decided to head up to the cliff to take a look for himself.
I'm an ex-sniper at the Special Operations Group and have received a lot of specialist training in covert operations and, wiggling around in the dirt. When I got up to the location, I then went about tracking.
Tim didn't have a gun on him, but he kept going anyway.
It started off walking and then a low crawl, then I was on my hands and knees, and then I picked up a really strong scent of body odour. I just homed in on the body odour. Now I'm in a low leopard crawl and I'm working very quietly, and I think I'm getting really close to something. I don't know what it is, but I'm getting close. And as I peered through the undergrowth, I could see colour, which I took to be a person laying dog in the undergrowth. So then I very carefully leopard crawled back out again and went back to the OP. And I didn't have a radio, I didn't have a phone, I had nothing. And I looked down and all my divers had got out of the water and they're all sunning themselves on the bonnet of the Land Cruiser, waiting for their next instruction. And I'm trying to get their attention without yelling, 30 metres away, down onto the road, the car park. So I started waving my hands and eventually I got their visual attention. And they're looking up at me and then they're waving back at me. And then how do I explain to these bozos, because they're not, and I mean that in a nice sense, they're clowning around and I've got something very serious I need to explain to them. They're not special operations trained, they don't know silent hand signals, so I'm using a variety of signals which I know to be things that I would use in my former job, and of course these guys are divers. So when I used an inverted thumb, which means you've got a suspect or the enemy, a problem, they interpreted that as that they were a diver and they were going down. And then of course I interpreted a handgun using my hand, and I also interpreted demonstrating my chin, which means person with a beard. So I've got a person with a beard, he's a bad guy, and I need a gun up here now.
Eventually, one of Tim's team cottoned on to what he was trying to communicate.
My mouth went very small. He said what gave it away was I could see you were deadly serious. But everyone else is going, he's found Santa Claus.
Because of the nature of their work, search and rescue officers are rarely armed. But Tim needed a gun, and the only person armed was the Federal Police liaison officer.
And she's really flustered because she's got torn between you never surrender your gun to this guy really needs my gun, and they're police officers, so I'm going to give him the gun. I don't know what this is about. And she's reluctantly handed the gun over, her service pistol over.
Tim's Victorian colleague hurtled up the hill with the gun, and quickly they devised an arrest plan.
So armed with now a pistol, we were barreled back into the bush, and very quietly, and the bloke hadn't changed his position. He was still laying doggo on the ground and made an arrest at that point. He offered no resistance, and he was a very malnourished Asian chap.
Tim and his colleague had just found Wong, more than 40 hours after he survived the capsizing of his rubber dinghy.
It was what he had with him, which was really the smoking gun. He had I can't recall whether it was in his pockets or he had a little bag with him. Either way, he had a GPS. And GPSs were relatively new then, a handheld GPS. And he had a couple of other things. He had a bottle of water. But it was the GPS that ultimately was the undoing. And that's what this was really started to open up into something so much bigger.
We'll explore what Tim's getting at with the GPS later on. But he also found something else really interesting on Wong.
The other thing he had on him was, these rubber bands that I spoke of? He had one of those holding up his pants.
Des didn't miss the significance of the rubber holding up Wong's pants either.
His pants were actually held up with a piece of rubber tubing, and our tool mark experts were able to match the rubber tubing to the tubing that was used to wrap the actual heroin. Very, very wet, tired. He'd obviously had a rough time in the bush. He was bending over, obviously very fatigued, distressed. When we tried to interview him with an interpreter, because he said he was Chinese, and we brought in a person that could speak those languages, and they said he's not Chinese, he can't understand us, but he needs to go to hospital.
Here's Celeste's recollection of Wong.
He was ridiculously cold, hungry, scared. He was apprehensive. He wasn't sure of what was going on as far as how he would be treated. But as soon as he was given some food and a warm drink and some water, he was very, very grateful.
Police took a video of Wong in custody. He looked stunned and as if he'd just been dug up from a grave. He's got a black beanie on his head and a flannel shirt. He's wavering like a punch-drunk boxer about to hit the canvas. For Tim James, the rush of discovering and apprehending Wong hadn't died down when he noticed the federal police officer who'd given over her gun getting what sounded like a bollocking over the phone.
She's on the phone to her boss, and she's getting screamed at by her boss. I can hear him over the phone. You what? You surrendered your pistol to another person, and they've arrested someone, and she's getting screamed at. The next minute she hands me the phone. This is right at the scene of the arrest. Who am I speaking to? And I can't recall the investigator, but I think it might have been of a superintendent rank. And he said, "You've got no idea what you're playing with. What right have you got to be making these arrests?" And he was really angry. And then he calmed down enough. And I was trying to placate him and calm him down. I'm saying, "Look, settle. It's okay." And he said, "Well, what right have you got to arrest this person? And what have you arrested him with anyway?" And I had a thought for a moment, and I've gone, "How does murder sound?" And then there was stunned silence. And he goes, "Murder?" And I said, "Well, I've got a deceased person on the beach. I've got a person that looks remarkably similar to him up here. That'll do for the time being." And that's what I'm holding him on. I'm holding this man under Victorian law for murder. And that really shut him up.
Coming up on the last voyage of the Pong Su.
An Air Force Orion aircraft come hooking around the coast, just missed the Pong Su radio tower.
And they asked me how quickly we can get your ship back together.
This is Australian warship. I intend to board you. Over.
Australian warship. This is motor vessel Pong Su.
These people, they expected to be executed.
The Last Voyage of the Pong Su is brought to you by the newsrooms of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. To read more and to watch the videos referenced in this episode, head to our websites. While you're there, why not take out a subscription to help power independent Australian journalism and productions like this podcast? If you're enjoying this series, leave a review on iTunes and recommend us to a friend. The Last Voyage of the Pong Su is reported by Richard Baker. Field recording and audio editing by executive producer Rachael Dexter. Narrative consultant is Kate Cole-Adams. Siobhan McHugh is consulting producer. Music and composition by Vicki Hansen. Sound design and mixing by John Greenfield. Extra production by Tim Mummery. And Tom McKendrick is head of audio. Thanks to our cast of actors. Chi Kwan Lee is played by Andy Song. Kiam Fa Teng is played by Anthony Ting. And Yao Kim Lam is played by Jason Chong. Casting by Catapult Casting. Script translations by Yan Zhuang. The reading you heard at the start of this episode was an excerpt from The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, read by Jason Chong.